All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is your tutorial on US24D, which is the rise of big business, or we like to call it industrialization. Um, so let's get started. So the rise of big business really has its foundings on inventions and new inventors and the consumer-based industry. Also, the control or the development of a very good infrastructure within the United States. Which we'll be discussing in this series. So as we stated in class, we had inventors. Thomas Edison, we all are familiar with. Thomas Edison's most famous invention, of course, is a light bulb. He also introduced electrical lighting and mechanical use of electricity. Because without the light bulb, the light bulb is essentially useless without electricity. So he had to manufacture electricity in large quantities. So these were electric power plants. And because there's electricity moving to light bulbs, and electricity could also be used for other things. And other inventors, not just Edison, other inventors invented appliances, as we would call them, but other inventions that would plug into a electrical socket or electrical source. So you wouldn't have the toaster oven or the electric, what they called the vacuum sweeper, of course, by the 20s, or the refrigerator. All those things would not have been invented without the use of electricity. But not only that, also electricity could be used as the energy source for many factories, allowing factories to be more efficient. I already did that. Okay. Edison had a team. The reason why Edison had so many patents, he had thousands of patents. And the reason why he had so many patents is because he had a team of experts or different inventors in his laboratory. The laboratory was called Menlo Park, and it was in New Jersey. And he would there's several inventions. Some famous ones are the phonograph, the first method of recording voice, and the motion picture projector, which he called the kinetoscope, which allowed you to film motions of movement through an illusion created by multiple pictures on a small film. And these became incredibly hot items. You can think about them as like the new iPads of the day, or the new iPhone of the day. People wanted them. They were not cheap, but eventually, as time went on, this technology saw itself inside homes. I mean, the fact that you can record voice in a phonograph and be able to even not just record voice, but you could record music. It brought upon the pop music industry and motion picture industry. And later on, we'll talk about in Hollywood as we get to the 1920s. It would not have been created without Edison's kinetoscope. The other great invention we talked about was the invention of the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell was the one who's credited for the invention. And in 1876, he invented it, and he created Bell Telephone Company in 1885 and built an empire on the telephone industry. The idea that you could talk to someone directly without going to an expert who knew Morse code was very helpful for Americans and helped our economy greatly. We also talked about Tesla, who created the idea of alternating current, which allows us to there's a more efficient and cheaper way of developing electricity and better electrical currents. He was actually a competitor with Edison, worked with Westinghouse, and we talked about in class the big smear campaigns of between the two. Westinghouse is a banker and would invest in inventors, and he also invested in electric companies. Now, Tesla invented AC current in Edison's laboratory, and Edison allegedly had the patent. There was a battle between who owned the patent, and eventually it there was a settlement between Westinghouse and Edison's company, and Westinghouse gave the patent of AC current to Edison. And thus, this kind of ended Nikola Tesla. Tesla was a very ingenious inventor, but he made a lot of inventions that were way beyond their time. These are just ideas, not necessarily actual items. Let me go back to that so you can see it again. But it's almost like Da Vinci when he created flying machines and tanks before those inventions could even be made. You have lasers, robotics, wireless communication. The guy came up with earthquake machines using resonant frequency. Some of these items work, some of them many of them didn't. But he's a pretty interesting character you might want to go ahead and research. All right, so big business, we're talking about, because of these new inventions, these ideas, businesses start to develop. A lot of businesses and different type of consumer goods. But the big ones were the businesses that supported the infrastructure. So we're going to be talking about oil, steel, and railroads. National markets, what created the rise of prosperity? Well, you had national markets, so the transportation advances. The railroads connected all the United States, and you could invent something, make it, and sell it to people all throughout the United States. In order to get to, you had captains of industry. These guys were the ones that owned the infrastructure. Since you have a large amount of energy and the means of developing factories and other forms of capital, and you have the railroad lines. All these captains of industry kept the nation running and connected, and allowed us to rise our business prosperity. Advertising was a huge thing. If you have this large national market, you're going to sell your product through catalogs or through or with magazines and newspapers. There's also a really low cost of production. Resources are very cheap and abundant. Natural resources, I mean, are very cheap and abundant. And you have a large amount of workers who are just willing to work for next to nothing. These are the rising immigrant populations. You have corporations come in to play. It's a less risky form of ownership of a company. A corporation is a business owned by several investors who own a percentage based upon how much they purchase. So you could own a fraction of a percentage of a company, and you can receive a fraction of a percentage of the profits, and those are called dividends. And so the investors own stocks and own ownership, and then when their ownership's value goes up, they can sell it for that value and make money off of the sale. So it's a great way to get money to invest in your company is through this multiple ownership. And plus, if your company were to fail, you would only be liable for how much percent to the percentage of which you own. So unlike a proprietor owns a business and the business goes under, that individual is responsible for all the debt and all the liability. If I own a fraction of a percent of a company and it falls under, I only lost a fraction of a percent of that company's value, which could be like $100 or $1,000. I can live losing $1,000. If I lost, say, if I had a company went under and I owed $1 million, I'm going to be ruined financially. So it's a good way to invest. So let's go talk about these captains of industry that we talked earlier. J.D. Rockefeller is one of them. He is the founder of the Standard Oil Company. Excuse me. Now, some people might think that Rockefeller actually pumped oil from the ground, and that wasn't really how he made his fortune. He made his fortune by actually refining the oil that was found, large quantities of oil found in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And he used and refined them to make kerosene for lighting of your lamps. But then some people, he could have went, his company could have failed once Edison invented the light bulb. But fortunate for him, the gas combustion engine was being used by more and more people, and he could just go ahead and refine oil to make gasoline to fuel people's vehicles. That was, of course, as I told you, his company is called Standard Oil. Now, Rockefeller made a lot of money by setting up a monopoly or a trust. And his trust, the way he did it, he would slash his prices so his competitors would fail. And instead of having his competitors fail, his competitors would instead work with him and be part of the Standard Oil Trust. And it's kind of tough it's kind of hard to explain. But as a corporation is a business owned by a series of investors acting as one person, a trust is a series of corporations acting as one corporation. It's like corporation of corporations in a way. And what this can do is these smaller companies are now a large conglomerate or a large company, and are making people that own stocks in smaller oil companies will own stocks in all of them or get the dividends from all of those companies. So what you have is, as I already stated, this is something called horizontal consolidation. And as what say I own I have stock in Exxon Mobil or at that time Exxon gasoline, and Exxon's part of the Standard Oil Trust. There's other members that are part of the Standard Oil Trust. That's Shell, Mobil, Amoco, Texaco, all different companies, but they're run under the Standard Oil Trust. So if Exxon makes profit, it goes to the trust, which then in turn goes to all those who own the other stocks. So like Mobil, I own Exxon stock, is now I also benefit when Mobil stock goes up. I'll get more dividends as well from them as well. So it actually benefits it really benefits the stockholders. It's not really good for consumers because he can raise his prices however he wants to. And of course, in dividends, as I said, shares the profit of corporations' profits. So they had these huge dividends. They made a ton of money with their monthly checks sent to them from J.D. Rockefeller's company. The other one we talked about was steel. This is the Andrew Carnegie, who used to be a railroad man and learned about the Bessemer process in England and used it. There's a method of creating steel in massive quantities. It's very expensive to make steel before the Bessemer process. But he used it, and he used to build steel bridges for the railroad. But when this railroad company went under, the railroad company he worked for went under, he then decided to focus on steel production, just strictly on steel production, and he would build, people are building large skyscrapers in these cities, so he would make money by selling his steel to build these buildings. He would make massive quantities of steel at a very low cost. Now, his company destroyed his competition by taking out all the modes of production, meaning he bought the mines, he bought the shipping companies, he bought the railroads, all those that connected to his factory, he owned them. And since he owned the mines, he would not give any coal or iron ore to any other competitor. He'd just give it to himself. Plus, he didn't have to pay the money for a profit. He didn't have to pay as much money for those resources. And we call this is vertical integration. Taking out all the means of the phases of production, from natural resources, transportation, finished products, and everything. The other captain of industry we're talking about was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He consolidated rail lines after the Panic of 1873, I'm sorry. He consolidated all the rail lines. He bought them for a fraction of a penny. When these rail lines were about ready to shut down or run out of, basically what happened is when the railroads were developed, they developed too many railroads. And these companies, which their stocks were worth a lot of money at one point, later became worth nothing because nobody used their rail lines because no one's going to take a train ride to Nebraska nowhere, Nebraska, and I don't know where I am, Kansas. These are small towns that maybe have a population of 100 people have a rail line that go directly to their downtown, and it didn't make any sense. And so these companies went under, and right when their stocks were worth pennies on the dollar, Vanderbilt bought them, and he controlled all the rail lines. And he began what's called consolidating, or a real true monopoly. If you rode a public rail line, you rode a Vanderbilt rail line, and you had to pay him a ton of money to ride that line. And he eventually controlled all the railroads between New York and the Great Lakes region. He's a pretty amazing guy. All right, factors causing industrial growth. By the way, this picture you see here is actually at a steel mill. This is what your job would be if you're making steel. It's very tough. It's very hot, very grueling. Factors relating to the growth of industry. We talk about access to raw materials and energy, very cheap. You have availability of a strong workforce. You got a lot of immigrants willing to work for very little money. You have new inventions, like we talked about with Edison, Tesla, and Alexander Graham Bell. You also have financial resources. You have a lot of banks who are willing to take a lot of risks and to invest into new inventors. If the guy has a great invention idea, then you can have a company that will build you, a bank will give you the money to build a factory to produce it. And so all the things were in the right order for America to become a very strong industrial state at the turn of the 20th century. I saw those. All right. And we talked about those infrastructures, examples of big business, railroads, oil, and steel. Now, these aren't in your notes, this next set, but you have to write them down. And this will be post-war changes in farm and city life. Farms reduced. There are fewer laborers needed on a farm with the development of mechanization. It's using machines to do hand labor. The reaper took away 5 jobs per farm. You could do work of 5 men with 1 guy. So those many farm hands who used to work on farms, how they survived, would end up without work in the rural America and decide to move north or to move to the cities to find work. And that's why you had that mass movement of people from rural to urban regions. Industrial development cities increased labor needs, brought more people in, and the thing is with mechanization in industry, mechanization needs workers in industry, while in agriculture, it does not need workers. It decreases the need for workers. A tractor can do a job of many, many people, and so that replaces workers. While in a factory, you have a lot of machinery that has to be maintained and run and operated by people, and so it requires more workers. And so industrialization provided the industrial development cities increased labor needs and brought more people to cities. You also had providing access to consumer goods. People could purchase or buying things for their home. It becomes consumer products and become very important, and people start buying them. You also had mail order. We talked about earlier about the Sears Roebuck catalog. You could have these. Every city had a department store, and those department stores would send, could send catalogs you could order from that department store there. Okay, and that does conclude the Rise of Big Business notes, and I hope these help you out, help you catch up if you are behind. All right, take care now.